Hi everyone and welcome to Tech Tuesday with the IET Toronto local network. If you haven't already connected with us, you can do that on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course IET engineering communities. And with that, we're going to move on to today's topic, which is a new challenge for electric vehicles, specifically looking at the technology options for an expanding charging point network. And I'm going to move across to our speaker.
From WSP, Parsons, Brinckerhoff, but I'm the Sustainable Transport Lead there. Yeah, I'm just here today to talk through the findings of a study we completed last year for a consortium of London boroughs into what the options are for providing charging provision for people who want to buy an EV but don't have off-street parking. And in London, that's a fairly significant challenge. I've gone for the title, A New Challenge for Electric Vehicles Meeting the Demand, I guess principally because when I first started certainly working on electric vehicle related work in 2010, it was a totally different kind of scenario to where we are today. And a frequent challenge the local authorities were advising were facing was the fear that the investment in charge points would be seen as a white elephant. These things aren't going to get used. It's difficult to justify. And roll the clock forward 6 years and we're suddenly in a position where you get charge point rage and people were complaining that they can't get to a charge point and waiting lists for quite a number of London boroughs. And the challenge has really kind of flipped on its head to providing adequate number of points. So I've concluded we can't win as transport consultants. We're damned if we provide too many and damned if we don't provide enough. But, and just before I go through the slides, I have gone for a predominantly picture-based set of slides, given it's day 2 of the conference Friday afternoon, and I'll try and move through at a reasonable pace. So study objectives, the picture probably says what the objective is and why really, but essentially what the boroughs wanted to understand was what are the options for charge point provision for people who want to buy an electric vehicle. We're encouraging people to do that. They don't have off-street parking. What can I do? So we reviewed a wide range of technologies internationally, and the focus was really on the short to medium term provision of options rather than the slightly more longer term solutions. And again, just as I mentioned, in London, this is a particular challenge, and so I'm sure the same would apply for many other large towns and cities, where in London, around 2/3 of people don't have access to off-street parking. So the ability to be able to charge on street is really quite fundamental. And solutions like this, with a cable hanging from a first floor window and an extension lead, are clearly not the way to go. So just very briefly on the methodology we undertook. So it's a 3-stage process. There's a large amount of desktop research that went into this, but also probably most importantly around a stakeholder engagement, which I'll say a bit more about on the next slide, to really inform what the different solutions are from a variety of different perspectives. And another important component was the case studies, which are on the bottom left there, where we actually took the examples that made it through the shortlisting process and said, what if someone in this house, on this street, very specific example, what if they wanted an EV? And we ran through each of the different technologies, each of the different charge point solutions, and said, how would this work here? Would this be enough for them to think, yes, I will purchase that EV? So on the stakeholder consultation side of things, we undertook a round of interviews and workshops with a wide range of groups, including the London boroughs themselves, central, inner and outer, transport authorities like TfL, but also the charge point suppliers, the EV OEMs, the vehicle manufacturers themselves, electricity suppliers. So a really kind of cross-disciplinary approach to understand what all the different challenges and considerations needed to be, and also to understand what their objectives are and what their interests are in the sector. So I've got onto the pictures now. We had an initial long list of different charge point solutions we looked at, and from that initial list and following a review, a number of the more promising options made it through to a shortlisted stage. And really what we did is run through the pros and cons of each of those possible solutions and how that might most effectively serve the resident wanting to buy an EV and not having off-street parking. So what might appear like an obvious solution is just to use the existing publicly available networks in many towns and cities. So in London, it's the Source London network. Looks a bit like this, conventional charge points. The new ones being installed would typically be fast chargers. Might be in a format like this where it's for private users when charging only, perhaps a double-headed point shared with a car club. So in London, they're looking to introduce around 6,000 of these points as part of the Source London network over the next few years. So that's obviously a good level of provision there. But there are complexities to how private users might be able to make use of that network. So just a number of considerations on that. It will work for some, but as we take an example here of a specific house and theoretical place, perhaps there's a Source London charge point over in the green mark shown to the left or to the right there. How close does it need to be for the person to think, yes, I'm going to invest in an EV and I'm happy to be entirely reliant on that public charge point a 5-minute walk away? Each person is going to be different, but there's probably reasonable expectation on some proximity there. And then there's the question of who they're intended for and what the price you'd have to pay for those points might be. So the format we understand that Source London are looking to pursue, so Ballor, who now operates Source London, it would perhaps focus on attractors. So maybe they'd put the points around station hubs, high streets, those kind of locations. If you're near one of those as a resident, that's fine. Maybe that's convenient for you. But there may be other places where you're not quite as close to that, and then maybe it's not as much of an option. Another consideration is, as I said, who they're intended for. So the Source London model and the operators below run the Autolib electric vehicle car sharing scheme that I'm sure many of you have heard of in Paris. Similar model there. They also have the charge points, and private users can make use of those points, but there are limitations. They weren't previously allowed to use them to charge overnight, for instance, which for residents is a fairly major drawback. I'm not sure if that's changed recently, but that certainly was the case when we did this study. And you can see an example there of a bank of 4 charge points with Autolib vehicles on them. Clearly, if you're trying to operate an electric vehicle car sharing scheme, there's only so much capacity you can afford to give over to a private user to charge their vehicle. So what's the intention of the network? So while Source plays a part, probably not for everyone. So an alternative model might be what we've termed a parallel network. So you've got a picture there of the Polar network, which is privately run by the Chargemaster Group, source of EV charge points, which again you can belong to as a member. And again, this will probably work for some. So it would probably have to function very much as a complementary measure to the Source public network, maybe be limited to residents only rather than just duplicating what the Source network does. But there are again a number of challenges to this model. So in terms of how you might deliver that, one borough is looking at a scheme where residents can effectively apply to have a charge point installed near their home, and when free households make an application, then a charge point can be installed and they effectively pay towards a shared proportion of that cost. But of course, that's reliant on the free residents applying for this charge point to be installed to live fairly close together, where a point can be found, like this blue marker here, that's kind of mutually acceptable to all of the free households. It also means that they're sharing that point, so they've maybe got access to it a couple of days a week. We actually think, for the most part, that's probably fine for the demands and the mileage that people in central London and inner London are driving the vehicle. Whether they perceive it that way is a different question. And there's also quite a high cost associated with this. Conventional charge points are very expensive, and for a private company to be able to deliver a charge point at a location like this is expensive, and that cost needs to be borne by the resident. There is also a challenge around how you limit access to that point. If it's on a public highway, in principle, it's quite difficult to restrict access to that bay from other people who might also own an EV. If they haven't contributed to the price, there's some challenges. So again, an example of what format that might take there. So skipping on to a different type of technological solution, some of you may have heard of these, they've had a fair amount of press, is what we've termed a socket network, where so there's a number of companies looking into this, where you might utilize existing street furniture like streetlights, and you can, at very low cost, introduce a socket into that people can plug into, draw electricity that's already available on the street, if you like. And how this works is that you're effectively taking all the expensive cost out of a conventional charge point, which is the telecommunications and the meter, and you're putting it into the cable. You can just see there the little green box. So rather than every single charge point having to replicate that infrastructure, you put it in the intelligent charging cable, and when someone comes along, they plug in their electric vehicle to the lamppost. That box communicates to a back office that vehicle X wants to draw electricity from this street light. It will bill you for the amount of electricity you've drawn, so that the council who's paying for the street lights don't have to pay for this person's using it to charge their EV. So the beauty of this model is that you significantly reduce the cost of the charge point to around 10% of a conventional one. But there are drawbacks and pros and cons of all of these options, and certainly not for everyone. One of the requirements is for the street light to be in the right place. You've got a picture there showing a street light set back from the curb edge. That would mean the cables trailing over the footway. It's a perennial issue for charging vehicles. It's probably a no-no. A number of street lights aren't the right dimensions to just physically accommodate the infrastructure. It's probably also worth noting that these deliver what's termed a trickle charge or a slow charge, so it's a kind of 3 kilowatt charge, which whilst adequate for charging vehicles overnight, doesn't appeal to everyone. Many people would prefer a faster charge if it's an option, but what these may enable you to do instead is have a far more comprehensive provision of them, and perhaps in time not to have to limit bays to EV only if you could just have every other lamppost available. So that's another type of option. This is a magnified picture of the same thing. A further feature of those is that they're really quite versatile, so they're not limited to only having a socket in the street light, albeit that's what's kind of captured everyone's imagination. You can actually have them in a socket on a wall, in a private car, in an off-street car park or something as well, or in a mast of some format, or integrated into a bollard or any manner of other footway infrastructure. Far less intrusive than a conventional charge point. It really is all about the charging cable that enables you to then just stick these very cheap sockets in wherever. So another option is then to look at rapid charging stations or rapid charging hubs. And really these are far more akin to, I guess, what we're all more used to at the moment when we own conventional vehicles, in that we can go to a petrol station, an intermediate location, charge up and go home. So there's a certain amount of comfort in this model, and that it's familiar and it's what we know already, and it's definitely part of the mix. Again, the challenge here comes is whether someone is happy to be entirely reliant on a rapid charger 10 minutes, 15 minutes from their home maybe, when buying an EV. So in principle it should work. But if you're trying to get home in the evening and charge up, you might arrive at the charger, there might be somebody already on it, you might have to wait 20 minutes for them, then you've got to wait 20 minutes for you to charge. It's not the 2 minutes at a petrol station experience we're used to at the moment, and this is one of the examples of charger rage that we're hearing about at the moment, where you get queues of vehicles at these rapid chargers. There's some concern about degradation to the batteries as well that some vehicles experience, a bit. There's not a huge clarity over how severe that problem is. And to some extent with this, we lose one of the real benefits of an electric vehicle, which is that unlike petrol cars, where you have to go and charge them in an intermediate stop, in principle, with an electric vehicle, it gets plugged in outside your home, charge every day, sitting where it's already parked anyway, and save you that additional trip. So part of the solution again, but pros and cons to each. So in summary, we found in reviewing this wide range of options that the problem really is quite complex, and there are probably 3 key factors that recur. So the business models and market acceptance of the different types of charge point are critical. So for instance, the parallel networks where someone can request the charge point to be installed at their home, in principle works, but it needs it to be significantly commercially viable for a supplier to deliver that point, and the payback periods are very slow, so it needs to be made to work. Technological challenges, the example of the socket network chargers is a startup at the moment. It's a German company, of the pictures I was showing there. And it's being trialled in a number of places, including in Hounslow, but it requires acceptance from the utility providers, the energy providers. They need to know that people drawing their electricity are going to be billed accurately, that the cost is going to be captured. And then locations and access, which I've not really been able to go on any detail here, but it's really quite a challenging area and requires, for instance, if you want to be able to let someone charge from a street light, you need to make that bay an EV only bay, unless you can get so many of them that they're kind of readily available and can avoid that restriction. So what we found with a really quite wide-ranging assessment of all the options, looking at a multi-criteria assessment of over 40 different variables, there is really very little separating each of those shortlisted options, and that suitability largely comes down to very localized factors when you look at particular streets or particular property. And one of the key considerations really is the scope for their wider rollout. And in our view, in the short to medium term, each of those is likely to constitute a part of the charging mix. Maybe in the short term, the more readily available options, the known entities are likely to continue to predominate. In the medium term, probably anticipate a bit more of a shift towards something like the socket network, because you can deliver it at scale and a very versatile option. So just to, I guess, end on a positive, what we certainly did find through this study is that the proportion of prospective EV buyers who don't have a suitable charging option without off-street parking diminishes quite rapidly over coming years as these technologies come online. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks for watching. Don't forget to connect with us via our social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date on upcoming events, like our next webinar on the 1st of November on lean product development. We look forward to seeing you there.